Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining IFAS AI and Data Science seminar series. This is the first seminar in 2025. I'm very excited to have all of you again. We have two speakers today. First speaker is Dr. Diana Taft, and the second speaker is Dr. Ziwen Yu. So we'll go with Dr. Diana Taft first. Dr. Diana Taft is an assistant professor in food science and human nutrition, and she joined UF in 2022. She did her postdoc research fellowship in microbiology at University of California, Davis, and also her PhD in epidemiology at University of Cincinnati. And her research is focused on development of the term infant gut microbiome, including leveraging bioinformatics tools to better understand the impact of breastfeeding on the infant gut resistance. Thank you for joining again. Please go ahead and start your presentation.
All right, so I am very much not the sort of person who is developing the new AI tools. I'm the person who's always looking for everybody else's algorithms to help me answer my own questions. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work I've been doing related to breastfeeding and the carriage of resistant escape pathogens in infants, and how sort of recent developments with bioinformatic tools have let me answer some new questions. Since I know this is more of an AI audience and very broad, I thought I'd start by explaining why antimicrobial resistance is such an important problem. And it has huge implications for human health. So in the US alone, we see more than 2.8 million resistant infections per year, leading to more than 35,000 deaths per year. These are illnesses that should have been more easily treatable and deaths that should have been preventable because we have antibiotics. And the truly terrifying thing is if we do not find new ways to control the spread of resistance, we risk going back to the 1910s, the 1920s, before there were any antibiotics available, and all the infections those killed. One of the reasons why it's worth looking at babies is babies carry more resistance genes than adults. So babies will have more resistance genes than their mothers. And anytime you have a population of commensal microbes with high levels of resistance genes, you have a risk of transfer to pathogens. Now, some of these resistance genes are found in bacteria in the breast milk, but one of the things I struggle to think about is what does that actually mean? And part of the reason why I struggle to think about this is during my postdoc work, I was able to show that babies who have high levels of bifidobacterium tend to carry reduced diversity and reduced abundance of resistance genes. So if you can switch the infant gut microbiome from sort of this very scattershot pattern we tend to see in the US to very high levels of bifidobacteria, which is more typical in most countries in the world, you can start to see less resistance. So this becomes a point where diet has the potential to help with controlling the spread of antimicrobial resistance. So what on earth does bifidobacterium have to do with diet? If you look in breast milk, it's a very, very complex biofluid. It changes over time, and that's both sort of over time since the baby was born, that's over the course of a day, that's in response to things like infection in the infant. So it's a very complex biofluid. And if you break down the components of breast milk and you exclude the water, the third most abundant component are these things called HMOs. These are human milk oligosaccharides. And these are interesting specialized sugars because the baby can't digest them. So moms are investing huge amounts of energy into producing HMOs in very high quantities that the baby can't digest. But what does eat them are bifidobacterium. So what you can do to have an infant have that very high level of bifidobacterium is you can promote breastfeeding. So by promoting breastfeeding of infants, we can be reducing a critical reservoir of antimicrobial resistance genes. But it goes beyond just the HMOs. Hold on, my student is pounding on my door. I'm giving a presentation. Sorry, he did know. He did know. So these HMOs obviously support the bifidobacteria, but there are a lot of other components in human milk that can influence the carriage of resistance genes in the infant. These include things like secretory IgA and other immune components that can very directly shape the infant gut microbiome to sort of more controversial ideas like the bacteria in milk. You tend to have very low levels of bacteria in milk, and it's not completely clear to me if they are truly important to shaping the infant gut microbiome or if they're more incidental. You also have components such as lactoferrin, which sequesters iron and helps to control the access bacteria have to iron in ways that can limit their growth. And the lipids found in breast milk can also influence the infant gut microbiome. So I'm going to jump topics really quick, and I'm going to talk about the escape pathogens. These are Enterococcus faecium, Staphylococcus aureus, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Acinetobacter baumannii, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and the full set of Enterobacter species. And the reason why these are very much of interest to public health is because these pathogens represent a large percentage of the resistant infections. So if you can identify the escape pathogens and identify whether or not they're resistant in a given microbial community, you can start to track the pathogens that are most likely to cause these resistant infections in humans. Infants are more likely to carry antimicrobial resistance genes. They're also more likely to have sort of low levels of these potentially pathogenic organisms because their immune system is less mature, their gut microbiome is less mature. You can start to see some of these species present at a higher level than what you would see in adults. So this led to the hypothesis I've been working on testing, which is that breast milk will reduce infant carriage of escape pathogens. And I was very fortunate to have access to the PREVAIL cohort to try to answer this question. The PREVAIL cohort is a Cincinnati, Ohio-based cohort with completed enrollment and follow-up. It enrolled 245 mother-infant dyads and followed the babies from birth to 2 years. So they have data collected weekly from birth to 2 years. Did the baby get sick this week? Did the baby get antibiotics? Did mother receive antibiotics during pregnancy or during delivery? Huge depth of information. We have information on breastfeeding. We have information on complementary feeding. Very, very rich data set. And one of the things PREVAIL worked to do was collect weekly stool samples from the infants. Now, one of the challenges of working with this already existing cohort is that the stool remaining from those weekly collections is very limited. But there've already been several time points where whole metagenomic sequencing is completed. So we have whole metagenomic sequencing available for all the month 2 samples. So this left me with what I would consider a very big bioinformatic challenge, which is how to identify if escape pathogens are resistant from sequencing data. Because so many resistance genes are on transposons, they're on plasmids, they can be shared across multiple species. How can you be sure that the species you most care about is the species that carries the resistance gene, especially when all you have is metagenomic sequencing, so you don't have individual isolates you can test. So first thing I did was I really went through and went, what do we have available in the PREVAIL cohort? Out of the 245 infants, we had 194 infants who had whole metagenomic sequencing of stool samples at age month 2. They had the completed infant health questionnaires and medical record checked for whether or not they'd had acute gastroenteritis in those first 2 months. We had information on what they were being fed at 2 months and information on maternal and prenatal intrapartum antibiotic use and on infant antibiotic use. So we had, for 194 infants, lots of the data we needed to answer this question. These infants sort of had a variety of characteristics. And there were differences between exclusively breastfed, which is listed here as EBF, partially breastfed, and not breastfed infants. Vaginally delivered infants were more likely to be exclusively breastfed. This is pretty well known in the literature because having a C-section can delay breastfeeding, which can make it harder to exclusively breastfeed. Cincinnati is a very diverse cohort, so we had a lot of people who were African American, but as is consistent in the literature, people who are African American tend to have lower breastfeeding rates. It's Cincinnati, so we don't have a lot of people who are Hispanic, but the sex balance between the infants was pretty close to the expected 50-50. So what bioinformatic tools were available to me today to answer some of the questions about escape pathogens from these whole metagenomic sequencing data? Metaflan 4 can identify escape pathogens if they're present. It's a very standard tool for microbiome analysis. And part of the reason why I went with it is it can be used with strain-flan later if you find anything interesting. I opted to go with the AMR++ pipeline to identify resistance genes within the whole community. And the reason why I liked the AMR++ pipeline is because it uses the MegaRes database. And this is a very carefully curated database, unlike some of the more popular or larger databases, where each antimicrobial resistance gene is put into only a single resistance category, whereas some genes can provide multi-drug resistance, so some databases will multiply classify individual resistance genes, which can make the analysis harder. But this still left the main puzzle of how do I know if it is an escape pathogen that is carrying a resistance gene and not just some other commensal within the gut microbiome. And I was very fortunate to find out about a tool called MGS to AMR. And if any of you are interested in identifying specific species in microbial communities that are carrying resistance genes, I found this one to be a relatively easy tool to run. So there were definitely some hiccups. And two, to be one that was giving pretty reliable answers. And the heart of MGS to AMR are two new algorithms. The first is graphical fragment assembly linear optimal path through seed segments. And the second is adapted I'm apologize if I say this wrong, Dijkstra algorithms for GFA. And the basic idea here is that DNA has more information than just the sequence because you know orientation, because you know 5' to 3'. So if you can use that orientation information to inform how your short reads assemble, you can start to find longer segments coverage. And as you find longer segments of coverage that contain antimicrobial resistance genes, you can start to expand them out on either side to figure out what species is this in or what plasmid is this in. And based on that, you can figure out the origin of the plasmid. All right, so a little bit about what I learned is the first thing I wanted to know is, were infants carrying these escape pathogens? And the answer to that was very much yes, and unsurprisingly, more so than adults. And in particular, infants carry in their guts 4 different antimicrobial, or potentially 4 different antimicrobial resistant escape pathogens, including multiple representatives of the genus Enterobacter, Enterococcus faecium, Klebsiella pneumoniae, and Staphylococcus aureus. Now, the Staphylococcus aureus is most likely a skin bacteria, most likely from when mothers breastfeed. But the others, yeah, those aren't things you see at that level in adults. And very often, the infants with the higher relative abundance of these pathogens are the infants who are carrying the resistant strains. So the next question was, is this associated with breastfeeding? And if you just look at any carriage of Enterococcus faecium, regardless of whether or not it's carrying a resistant strain, the never breastfed infants are more likely to carry a Enterococcus faecium than the exclusively breastfed infants. And the partially breastfed infants, we just miss significance, but it does look like they're trending towards carrying more Enterococcus faecium than the exclusively breastfed infants. For Staphylococcus aureus, the pattern actually tended to flip the other way. Again, it's a skin bacterium. If you're breastfeeding at the breast, you're going to be swallowing a bunch of your mother's skin bacteria. So it makes sense that the exclusively breastfed infants would be more commonly, I don't know if it's colonized, but at least more commonly have detectable levels of Staphylococcus aureus in their gut microbiomes. For Klebsiella pneumoniae, again, you saw higher risk of carriage with never breastfeeding, and you saw actually higher risk of carriage with partially breastfeeding, vaginal delivery, and maternal antibiotic use. So maternal antibiotic use during delivery or during pregnancy was associated with infant carriage of Klebsiella pneumoniae. And we didn't hold on to the significance when you were looking at just the resistant strains, but that may reflect the fact that what strain did an infant happen to be exposed to? Was it resistant or not? Because our non-resistant Klebsiella pneumoniae were then grouped in with our non-carriers. So that may explain why that model changed as much as it did. With Enterobacter species, again, breastfeeding is protective against carrying an Enterobacter species, and it's also protective against carrying a resistant Enterobacter. Maternal antibiotic use actually decreased carriage of Enterobacter, so this may represent the fact that if you're knocking out some of the Enterobacter before or during delivery, infants don't pick it up as much from other places, but that is speculation on my part. And the Enterobacter resistant form was also decreased by higher levels of bifidobacteria. So again, that suggests, since breastfeeding remained in the model, that it's more than just bifidobacterium that are shaping this influence. All right, so in conclusion, exclusive breastfeeding reduces infant carriage of escape pathogens. And infants do carry 4 of the 6 escape pathogens in their gut microbiomes, and generally at a prevalence higher than what is reported for adults. In the literature, 17 to 25% of adults might carry Klebsiella. Pneumoniae, we were seeing closer to 70% of the infants in the PREVAIL cohort, and these are term infants, which I found fascinating because that comes closer to the levels of Klebsiella pneumoniae carriage you see in preterm infants. And it was generally thought that that high level reflected the hospital environment. It may just reflect the fact that the infant gut microbiome is more permissive than an adult gut microbiome. We definitely need to do more research into breastfeeding, and we have to move into the complementary feeding period in the weaning diet to see if there are ways we can continue to leverage diet to control for antimicrobial resistance gene carriage and to sort of control the spread of resistant escape pathogens. And I am so grateful to all of you who are more on the developing the new AI tools that I can then use, because you're the ones who let me answer questions like this. So if you have a new tool that might be useful to identifying resistance genes in microbial communities and where they come from, I'd love to talk with you, because I've got data that I'd love to work through and see if your tool lines up with what I have here. All right, thank you for your time, and I believe I've saved 5 minutes for any questions.
Is there any question from audience?
Yes, I'm Ari Havelaar here. Diane,
Hi.
thanks for a great talk. Very interesting to get a little more insight in what you are doing. The method, the new method that you described, this GLOB method, I can imagine it working for resistance genes on the chromosome. You also mentioned that a lot of them are on plasmids. So could you talk about, does it also work for plasmids? And if so, how does it work for plasmids?
It does. It works for plasmids because the plasmids tend to wind up with markers depending on the species they're in. So it's able to extend from the resistance gene far enough on either side to identify plasmids, and then it goes to the BLAST database of plasmids of known origin. And because it's got enough information on the plasmid as a whole, because it's able to do better assemblies, they're able to make pretty good predictions about which species the plasmid is actually in.
Great, great. The second question is, I'm working on a new grant proposal at the moment where we want to identify pathogens in kids in Ethiopia, of course, you know me, through shotgun sequencing directly. And one of the challenges is pathogens like STEC, where you need a combination of 2 genes, the STX and some kind of an adhesin. So would this method also, you think, be applicable to finding two genes on the same chromosome? Because that would be the question here. We find the two genes, but are they on the same chromosome?
I think that one would be trickier, and I think so. The good news is the authors of this tool are very responsive to questions and very helpful. So I think as it's currently coded, that where you needed to know the two genes are on the same chromosome, I don't think as it's currently coded it will do that. But I do think there are ways you could extend the program to make it able to do that. And I would say definitely reach out to PJ Van Camp, and I have his email because I had some trouble getting the tool running the first time, and he was wonderfully responsive. So I would be willing to bet that if you emailed and asked him, he'd be willing to work with you to help answer that, because it's the sort of question and the sort of tool he's trying to develop. So I'm more than happy to put you in touch.
Yeah, please. Yeah, if you share his contact details, that would be great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I hear none. Thank you, Diana, for really interesting topic and great talks. It's so outside of my area, so it was really fascinating for me to listen. Yeah.
I'm glad. I hope I didn't bore too many people with the background, but I figured it was a diverse audience.
Yeah. It was actually really very interesting. Although some of the gene or bioinformatics is really difficult for me to understand fully, but still, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Ziwen Yu. Okay, I see his face now. Dr. Ziwen Yu is assistant professor in AB department at University of Florida. He specializes in big data applications for agriculture system. His work focuses on empowering small farmers, clarifying data ownership, and promoting equitable data governance. Dr. Yu applies AI and IoT technologies to optimize irrigation and enhance climate resilient farming, leading a USDA-funded project on root zone soil moisture. He also pioneers blockchain for secure data sharing, developed quality assurance and quality control procedure for cultural data networks, and utilized generative AI to integrate farmers' perspective into corporate and government decision-making, and advancing sustainable and accessible agriculture innovations. Ziwen, floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Do you see my screen well?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone, and I really appreciate to be here and presenting this topic. I would like to introduce some exploratory research that we're doing here using generated AI or large language models to assist in some survey for a very tricky topic in agriculture. The topic I'm going to talk about is using LLM as virtual survey participants in agriculture data rights research. All right, so some backgrounds in here. As we know that AI has been changing the whole world, including agriculture. We're now using data-driven technologies to improve all these efficiency and efficacy in farmer operations or any kind of operations practices in the supply chain. And AI, instead of algorithm-centric, which is a couple years ago, are now more and more on the data-centric, which makes data becomes more and more valuable for not only for agriculture itself, but also for the technology advancement in the industry. So that turns out the rights regarding data during the adoption of this technology in agriculture is an emergent topic that we need to investigate, especially how is the sustainable development for the industry in the future by engaging different kind of stakeholders. So the data rights that we are referred to could be, ownership, access, governance of these data, and how these data is going to be associated with the rights that related to different kind of stakeholders, especially for smallholder farmers. So the challenge in investigating this topic is we try to know people's perspective, as we know that right now all the practices in the industry is a chaos. And we are really hard to talk with these industrial practitioners, especially for these giant companies who are having very aggressive contractual terms that can control and managing the data, which is collected by farmers. So we're trying to learn farmers' perspective, which is something that we think is more tangible to do in the discipline. So the survey is the first step that we're trying to do. And actually, we did a survey in 2022, a physical survey, trying to know the farmers in Florida and their perspective regarding data ownership in the industry. And now we found these difficulties in conducting this kind of a social study. One is we understand that data ownership in agriculture is a very complex subject that even for companies or even for experts, people's understanding regarding data governance, all these legal, politics, economics impacts, and all these nuanced technology impacts are very vague, and they show very diverse perspectives and diverse understanding. So that turns out the design of these surveys or the question of these surveys is very tricky to make sure that we can obtain the valuable insights from our results. And two is it's very hard to obtain sufficient participants to our study. So we only got 15% responding rate from the survey we did in 2022. And as we found, and also as the previous conversation we had with different stakeholders, that we know that there are very diverse perspectives from these stakeholders, especially for some marginal groups. However, for these social studies, although we can find some participants, but for those participants are mainly for the mainstream demographic groups, but for those kind of minority groups, it's very hard to engage them into the social study, so that it's very hard for us to understand their perspective, and that can bring these bias to our study. So given those challenges, as the emergence of large language models, such as ChatGPT, we realized that this could be a potential solution to address the challenges that we are facing in social study, especially for the topic that we are interested in. One advantage for LLM is it can simulate human beings' response. So LLM has been trained by using data generated by human beings in language, in these kind of nuanced text information from textbooks, social media, all these historical writings or communications between human beings. And then it can be easily tuned to behave like different roles. So you can give some definition about role setting to the LLM model, and then it can correspondingly give different perspective responses to the question. And one advantage for this is we don't have to worry about responding rate in the social study anymore. So we can use LLM to behave any number of participants out there. And two is LLM can also help us to customize the demographic configurations, especially for these minority groups. So some groups that is really hard to reach out in the traditional method in a social study. And then now we can define their demographic features in LLM, and then can obtain at least a preliminary understanding of their perspectives. And the third advantage in here is I think the LLM is going to change the methodology for the social study very significantly, especially how the question design. So a lot of time in designing these survey questions, people would be criticized how the question should be put so that the audience is going to be fully understand the purpose or the meaning of that we trying to deliver, and then to provide response that matching our study focus. But using LLM, they have very good understanding capability, and they can have a good grasp of the meaning for these questions, so that just reduce the complexity for design this study. But we don't, as LLM is still a new tool that has not been fully explored in this application, in different methods or in different fields such as social study. The framework to apply LLM in conducting these surveys are very few, and then we cannot find any real references that can be directly adopted in here. So the purpose for this study is trying to test the feasibility in using LLM and replacing human participants in the survey, especially for our topic is for farmers' perceptions about data rights. So here's the design of our research. So we're trying to see LLM-based farmer responses simulation. The first step is we crafted the LLM to be virtual participants. That step is focusing on the prompting process. We have the strategy developing here, trying to have the role setting up, the condition design for the background knowledge, and also the scenario responses that is guiding the response, and also the question that we put for LLM to answer. And then as we are repeating this process to simulate multiple participants' results, we're going to use 3 metrics to evaluate the performance of this model. Well, the first one is a consistency. So we're trying to know if the answer by LLM is statistically consistent with a real-world survey result. And the second is a sensitivity. So we know that prompting strategy in LLM is very important, at least for ChatGPT or traditional LLMs. So we test out different prompting styles, inputting the question, and to see if that will bring us drastic different answers. And the third one is adaptability, especially for the demographic features. So we're trying to see if LLM results can also reflecting the sensitivity of this demographic feature that we see in the real world data. And then the role-based context, how important it is to play in the whole model. Again, in the third ones, we have a real world validation that we have a benchmarking against the 2022 survey that we did for the data ownership perspective in Florida farmers. So here's the environment methodology. So we use the environment of Python, and we are using OpenAI API so that we're incorporating GPT-4 to be the LLM model that we use to simulate farmers' responses in here. And the specific steps are, first one is we develop these strategies for prompting so that to make sure LLM can produce human-like responses. And then we selected some key questions from the real-world survey to do this test in this model. At the end, as we got the results, we're going to customize all these aspects to evaluate the performance. And the measurement for the evaluation is going to be the chi-square test results. So some general methodology here, the prompting strategy that we use is we developed the prompting strategy using 3 important parts. The first one is role definition. So for every test, we are giving a specific configuration of the role. So for example, we have the role as, imagine you are a 56-year-old white male farmer in Midwest US, managing a 500-acre corn farm with an annual income of this amount and 20 years of experience. So these are all the demographic configuration for a specific farmer that we are interested in. And then the second part is the context for framing. So basically, we need to provide some background information so that we trying to let LLM to understand what's the framework that we're trying to ask our question in the third step. So in here, we just give this example that you are trying to participating in a survey about data rights in adopting new technologies in farming operations, and please respond based on your personal understanding. And the third one is a scenario description. So that's basically the key question that we're going to put in here. And also the second part is we're going to ask LLM to provide a fixed, a uniform response or uniform result so that we can compare them in this study. And then for the question that we select in this study is we are selecting 3 different type of questions based on the complexity of the reasoning process. So the first question that we select in here is, have you ever learned about data as a property or its ownership? And LM is going to be asked to select options true or false. We think this is a simple question because it's very straightforward and it doesn't need a lot of reasoning process to give answer yes or no. And the second one is more complex. So we're asking the LM to ranking the importance in protecting data ownership with the option of copyright laws, contracts, and trust between farmers and ATPs. ATP means agriculture technology providers, or the companies who are providing technology to the farmers. So we think this might need more background information or a little bit reasoning to think about the difference between these 3 options and their relation to the data ownership and sharing and use. So the most complex question that we're selecting here is we're trying to have LM to answer if they're in different ways that their data is going to be used, and how these usage by the companies is going to lower the price for the product that they receive by sharing the data to the company. So this is not a realistic condition, but we're trying to give LM a more hypothetical situation so that can lure LM to think more in a complex logic for reasoning. All right, so the first measurement, consistency. So the goal for this is we're trying to see if LM can generate human-like responses that are statistically aligned with the real-world survey results. The methodology that we're using here is we are replicating the demographic distribution of the real-world survey by changing the role setting of the prompting strategies, and then creating these AI agents for each participant that we had for the real-world survey. And then we repeated this process multiple times, trying to get a more data samples and have the statistical distribution compared with them. And then again, we are measuring alignment with the model results and survey results. So here is the comparison that we got. For those 3 questions that we introduced before, the binary questions, ranking, and scenario-based questions, that we see for the LM models, we can see that the results are converge over time, especially for the simple question. It converges 5 to 10 trials. We can see that the distribution is consistency over time. However, what we see in the real survey is it's very diverse results, especially for this question, and we don't see any convergence sign for the real results. And similar thing happened for the other 2 complexity question in different complexities. Although the difference is the convergence iteration happened for the ranking question is 10 to 15 trials. And for scenario-based question is 15 to 20 trials. So we think there's some, we still need to make some modification or improvement for this step, as we see that convergence answers are not really obvious in the real world survey data, but it can be seen that the LLM models could be due to that they are trained by the data that has fixed and then doesn't show a lot of variance, and then it kind of over time, it goes to a single distribution. So what we see in here is the real survey results, diverse responses cannot be really represented by the LM models. So the consistency evaluation should be is not really good for this case, but we do think there's some improvements, especially for the demographic configurations, should be fine-tuned or restricted to see if this alignment can be improved. And then the second one is sensitivity to the question wording. So we're trying to understand what the wording style impact LLM's performance, and in which way that we should prompt the question so that LLM can understand the meaning and reason accordingly. So the methodology that we using here is we are using different prompting styles to draft the scenario-based portion of the prompt, and then repeat the process, get the distribution, and measure it with the real-world data results. So the prompting styles that we're using here, we have 5 styles. The first one is zero shooting. Basically, you are just putting the question and without giving any other information to LLM. And then a few shots. Basically, you're giving some examples for the LLM to see and see if they can give a corresponding answer that align with the example that you provide. And chain of thought style, that is, you give steps of logics or reasoning process to the prompt, and to see if the LLM is going to reason accordingly about this logic map. And then the next prompting is, instead of give how you should reasoning to LLM, we just tell LLM that you should not reason in this way and that way. So you basically, you're blocking the ways that is really wrong, and then only let LLM to circle around for any available logic that they can use. And then the third one is hybrid. So we are using few shots and negative styles together. So we give some examples to LLM, and also we are also telling LLM that you should not thinking in this way or that way, so that it gives a boundary of the logic and also give an example of the logic to LLM. And then here is some examples that we're putting here. So basically, I can go through this quickly. The first one is very simple, just put in question. And second one is give some examples in here, so example 1 and 2. The third one is give some steps of reasoning logics. And the fourth one is just trying to assuming some conditions to make your response. And the last one is just combining the examples and do not assume conditions to the promptings. And here's the result that we come up with. So this is really aligned with our expectation that the hybrid prompting style providing the best results for all the questions in here. And so that we think it will be good for future applications to use LLM, always using these hybrid prompting styles, so that all the logics is going to be aligned with the human understanding, especially the designer's understanding. And some insights that we get from these results is we can see that LLM, although not showing in the result over here, we can see that LLM can understand the logic or the meaning of the questions very well, regardless of the testing styles of this wording. So different kind of the ways that we're putting the question, and we also ask LLM to providing why they give this answer. So we can see we can manually see that LLM do understand the question, regardless how simple or how vague that we provide the information. But however, we do see that the reasoning capability of LLM is really subject to the style of prompting, and based on the methodology that we tried in here, the hybrid styles gives the best performance overall. And the third test that we did is we're trying to see the demographic adaptability of the model. So we're trying to, by changing the key demographic features, we're trying to see whether responses shift meaningfully based on respondent identity, and whether such shifts align with real-world stakeholder perspectives. So the way that we did in here is we're adjusting the demographic features and gather the corresponding results in the LLM results. And also we are repeating this multiple process, trying to get a distribution so that we can use chi-square test to measure the alignment with the real world data. Then the results just show us that farm size and education are the two key demographic features that impacting farmers' perspective regarding data ownership. So it really makes sense for us because farm size, it determines the complexity or workload for farmers in managing their farming practices. A large farm is more likely to adopt technologies so that they can automate all the process and obtain a high efficiency. But a small size, like a family-owned small size farm, they might not able to have the resource to get new technology, or they're not necessary to get a high level of automation because the size is small and they can handle a lot of things themselves. So that really aligns with our understanding. And also we see this sensitivity that is really high in our real world survey results. And the second one is education. This is we see that education is a key factor in our real world survey results, but we didn't really expect LLM can reveal that, because what we see is farmers give drastic answers that depending on their education level to a question called why you are not using data in your farming process. So for those who are having graduate level degrees, there's only one answer that people says, I'm not collecting data because I'm really concerned about cybersecurity for my data, and all these breaches happen in industry is a risk that turns out I'm not collecting data. And for those who having graduate education level lower than undergraduate, most of the answers is, oh, I'm not quite sure about the benefits by collecting data, and are they really improve the efficiency of my farming? So this question is not actually aligned with any questions that we are using here, but surprisingly, we also find that LLM can provide these kind of sensitivity factors that we see in another question, but not using here. From these results, So from these results, we can see that the key demographic factors can be identified by LLM results align with the real world survey. But all these dependence of these factors so right now we are changing these factors independently. However, we are very interested to see how these dependence to other factors on some demographic conditions. So for example, if we can choose a representative demographic group, and to see if we change one of the parameters, one of the factors in here, if the answer is going to be changed, if the perspective difference is going to be represented by LLM. Okay, so the key findings and implication of future improvements in here. So basically for the consistency versus realism trade-off, so we can see that statistically, we're struggling to get alignment between LLM results with real world data, because the real world data has these variants that cannot be really represented by the LLM results. However, the problem that we think for this is the diversity of the demographic distribution is too much for the LLM to capture. So a further improvement for this step is we're going to find a representative demographic subsets, so that for within each subsets, a common perspectives can be tested, and then this common perspective can lead to a convergence that can be aligned with the statistical results that generated by LLM answers. And then the second one, the second one is rule-based complex reasoning. So we do see that the question complexity doesn't impact the LLM understanding of the meaning, However, the way of prompting, especially the reasoning process, reasoning framework, is going to help LLM to generate response that can align with the design logic. So, but a very tricky part is, as we are using data rights as a topic in here, this is the emergent knowledge that not even even experts doesn't have a very good grasp of the knowledge. So it would be great to have different specific disciplines and give more specific background knowledge to LLM so that all these reasoning process, reasoning limits of LLM can be tested out. And then for the demographic sensitivity, I think we do see that LLM can reveal the key factors of demographic features. However, all these interconnected dependence to other demographic features, especially for some specific groups, need to be tested out as a baseline for this step. And then for prompting, I think we need to test out the strategy in different LLM as well. Although for the ChatGPT in here, we do see that hybrid style gives the best performance. But with new LLMs such as DeepSeek, which is very competitive, we have not tested out that yet. But based on people's blog or people's tryout, we do see that new models may not require a very strategic style in prompting and can provide good results in very vague questions or framework of logic. So the conclusion, so we do see the potential of LLM in social studies, especially for some topic that is really new and very tricky areas. And also we see the limitations, such as how we're going to design the question and how we're going to choose the way to measure their performance. And of all these demographic configurations should be carefully selected. In future directions, I think for the performance that we test out in here, I already mentioned in the previous slides that we're going to try different ways to overcome some problem that we see in our study and trying to improve the way to get better results and also develop a framework for future application using LLM in social study. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have today. So thank you everyone, and I will be happy to take any questions. And again, so this is a very exploratory test to use LLM, but I'm happy to see any kind of opportunity to collaborate in future proposals or research or even papers if there's any chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ziwen. It was a very interesting topic. Do you have any question from audience?
Hey, Ziwen, this is Rafa. I'm curious. So you coerce the artificial intelligence to fine-tune the response so that it could align with the survey. Why didn't you do that on the other side of the equation? In other words, why didn't you also use different prompts on the people to see if they would get the same answer?
I would say I was thinking about that, but there's a tricky step for that direction is how you measure the similarity between people's response and LLM's response. So I also approached to some faculty in computer science who is doing these text understanding. So so I learned about the methodology in there. It was still very conceptual to my understanding. So you are not able to give very quantifiable information in there. So that instead of doing the way that you mentioned, I would like to do the reverse way, which is we are using a survey question using quantifiable results, so that exploratory to see if and again we did this survey in 2022 and we found a lot of a hard time to engage people to participate. And so that's one of the motivation, how we can replace people in a survey, so that for any questions, especially for technology adoption, that we're trying to see if farmers are going to use this technology or that technology, so that we can develop our tools in here using AI or other kind of methods.
So I understand intent, but my point is that prompt engineering that is now used on the ChatGPT and all these things might also produce different results on people. In other words, how you formulate the question, the background you give them, and so on. So then you might bias the real set that you're trying to train against by the question itself on people as well. So to understand that that effect, it might be good to have the same treatment on the people and the AI and see what kind of difference you're finding. I know it complicates totally the analysis, but I think this real survey answer is probably not so, because people change their minds as you are feeding them information as well, you know.
Right. So I totally understand that. So you know, the provenance of these change and these perspectives is something very hard to get, and that's also something that we're trying to know. So people are changing their perspectives. So if we can use LLM to see these changes over time, is something you know, we're also interested in. But yeah, I totally agree with you to investigate this. These methodology from different directions, and is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Dana. Hey, Ziwen, this is Shija. Thanks, and my head is kind of spinning with, you know, when you use the word replace humans, I started paying close attention. But the question that Rafa had a minute ago about using or constructing prompts to elicit better responses from humans, I think till that point, I had understood the use of ChatGPT, but then you took it several steps further. So I'm like a little behind in understanding. Let me try to see if I can explain. My question is, and it must be very, from my place of lack of understanding, is the biggest limitation, or one of the limitations, were that certain demographics, it was hard to bring certain demographics to the table in your survey, in your real world with human beings kind of survey. So if those responses are not represented out there in the universe anyway, how might you reconcile that imbalanced representation of voices when LLM is giving you responses back? Is that a valid question?
Yeah, that's a very typical question, and I think that's a very good question, especially for, I think, not only for LLMs, it's generally for any kind of AI application. So we always have some people in this case, or some areas or some uncertainties that we cannot capture in the training data that we use for AI applications or development. And in this case, we always have these very minority groups, or those people that is very hard to reach out. And even for LLMs, it's not able to capture their understanding. That is a possibility out there all the time. So a way that we can overcome this is, you know, we enhance the training process for LLMs. Or another option is we bring these external knowledge to LLMs and reinforce the training for them. So there are technologies right now called RAG, retrieval knowledge process.
Augmented.
That's one of the steps that we are proposing right now. So we would like to have this large scale social study and trying to capture farmers' perspective or people's perspective with a very large group, so that to have a large coverage in there, and then using that data to inject into LLM models, so that in the future we can have the LLM models to simulate these people's perspectives, especially for the subject that we have been covered in this large-scale social study. So basically, our idea is trying to have one large-scale social study to save the effort for the future. So in the future, we can use this enhanced LLM models to simulate a lot hard to reach communities perspective. Does that answer your question?
Well, it has piqued my interest a little bit more. So I think we should get a whole bunch of social scientists in the room and, engage in like hot debate. I think that would be really interesting.
All right. I'll be happy to. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
I did have a question. I was wondering if you might be able to speak a bit more about the importance of LLM selection when it comes to doing this. Because if I think about farmers, I think about somebody a group that probably has a very small digital footprint. And so if we're looking at something from OpenAI and what they have trained their model on, I feel like you're probably going to get mostly from farmers. That's going to come from maybe news interviews. And I'm curious if you were to do the same study, but using Meta's AI, if you would capture a lot, potentially better data, because I can tell you a lot of my growers are on Facebook, and that's where they are vocal and sharing their opinions.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the question. I think, I would say if it's 2 or 3 weeks ago before DeepSeek coming out, I think that would be a question that I think we don't have to worry too much about, because the prompting style is always the key process for LLMs, especially for the question that is for traditional knowledge. And for farmers, I think most of them might ask, how the weather is going to perform, how the crop is going to respond, and other things regarding to this traditional knowledge. But the prompting process would be tricky part in the I should not say traditional LLMs, but for the LLMs before DeepSeek. But when DeepSeek comes out, people are questioning about prompting style. And people are saying that prompting style would not really that sensitive anymore, as these models can understand a lot better and reasoning a lot better. So we have not tested out yet, but for that's something that we are interested to do. But again, I'll be happy to talk with farmers or other agents regarding how to use LLMs and which LLM to use by farmers. So we know Meta, we know X, we know other kind of models are available, especially for Meta, the Llama model, which is open source. So it can be able to graft it in a very small scale and working locally. So that would be a benefits for us to have external knowledge to inject into. So just for example, so far, all these large language models are used for traditional reasoning process, but not for any specific knowledge. Especially, for farmers, they might have their lands in a very specific geographic location and have very unique responses to the weather or climate. But those knowledge are not able to captured by the LLM models. So if the open source model by Meta can be deployed locally and inject with these external knowledge that we can collect from farms, that would be a good advantage for using LLMs from farmers' perspectives. So yeah, I mean that's a different thoughts, but yeah, I'll be happy to have further conversations regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Because of the time constraint, I'm going to actually end the seminar series today. Thank you for coming. And next month, we will have 2 seminars bi-weekly, one in March 14 and another one in March 26. So please stay tuned for the advertisement. Thank you for coming again. I'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.